afternoon. It's good to see all of you, and such a wonderful honor and a privilege for me to be with you today. Thank you for coming in and having a conversation with me about the Department of Homeland Security, about cybersecurity, the role of CISA going forward, and how we will partner with private industry to make sure that we're addressing all of the concerns that our country faces on a daily basis. I recognize that I'm probably a new face to some of you in the room. I appreciate some of you getting together with me earlier today and having some candid conversations about ways that we can partner together into the future. I was honored to be nominated and appointed to this position by President Trump, and the responsibilities of this department that was created after 9/11 are quite extensive. When I describe it to people that I run into out on the street and everyday citizens that are interacting with me through different engagements, what I say to them is, if we have people that live in this country, come into this country, or leave this country, the Department of Homeland Security has jurisdiction over them. If we have products or goods that come into this country, leave this country, or are utilized here, we have jurisdiction over them. And things that happen on the internet that are sold, communicated, or done, or systems and critical infrastructure that is utilized in this country or interacts internationally as well with other world leaders and powers and countries, we have jurisdiction over them. The mission of the Department of Homeland Security is to secure the United States of America, and to do so with integrity, and to do so in a way that honors what our founders gave us by giving us the greatest experiment in human history. Cybersecurity is national security, and there's several topics that I want to cover with you today on what the future looks like in new ways that this government and administration can partner with you. My background, you probably do know a little bit about. I grew up in South Dakota. I'm a farmer and a rancher, spent my life running several different businesses, served in our state legislature in leadership, served 4 terms in Congress on the Armed Services Committee, the Education and Workforce Committee, Natural Resources Ag Committee, and also the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee we often refer to as the committee that has the most ways it can be mean. They have jurisdiction over trade, taxes, health care. A lot of what goes through Congress goes through that committee. Went from there to run for governor of South Dakota because governors are CEOs. Governors get the chance to get up every single day and set an agenda and work hard to make sure that they're putting in place opportunities for people to thrive and to be successful and to live the American dream. Being in that position, South Dakota at that time was pretty stagnant. We weren't growing, we weren't recruiting new industry or businesses, and I decided that technology and cybersecurity would be our future. And aggressively, during my 6 years as governor of our state, worked with our universities, and specifically Dakota State University, to build out cybersecurity programs, open up opportunities for new students to be educated. We train a lot of NSA employees in our state, and so I am passionate about the work that you do and how we can help you do it better, how we can be much more efficient, and what we can do to be effective in delivering not just efficiencies, not just better communications and services and commerce, but how we can do it in a secure manner that protects our future. Back in the day when I was growing up, we certainly interacted with technology and used it in all of our businesses. But back in those days, we had to drive our own tractors. We had to get out of our vehicles and go have communication tools. And now today, technology does all of those things for us. I will tell you, I wrecked a lot of equipment. From growing up with a dad that required us to do a lot of work all the time, that now today, computer software systems, satellites, and other technologies help us do that work in a much more streamlined, efficient, and much more safe manner, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the advancements. I have 4 grandkids with my husband, Brian, that are all under the age of 4, and I can't even imagine what technology will look like by the time they have the chance to grow up. That's where the innovation that you provide is going to be so key to our future. There's one story I want to tell you about how I approach things, and then I'm going to get into some of the things that we can work together on. When I grew up on this farm and ranch, my dad was a cowboy. He was very tough, and he a lot of times didn't teach us to do things. He just threw us into the middle of them. For instance, he never once taught me how to drive. The first time I actually had to drive, I was about 10 years old, and he threw me in a pickup while we were chasing cows and said, follow us with the truck, and figured it out. I was 12 years old when I had to drive a semi. We were at the field, we were harvesting corn, and we were driving the truck back up onto the road with a load full of corn, and we were going to take it home, and I was sitting in the passenger seat when he suddenly remembered he needed to get the other truck back to the farm. So he said, "Christy, jump over here, grab the wheel," as we're going down the road. He said, "I'm going to get the other truck," but he said, "Take the wheel and make your corners wide, and I'll meet you at home," and he jumped out the door. So I dove across the cab, grabbed the steering wheel, and started driving this truck home. And it was about 7 miles until I got back to the farm. Took the widest corners you've ever seen, never once shifted, just went 15 miles an hour the whole way home. I remember when I got into the yard, I didn't even know how to stop the truck. And so I just turned it off and let it drift to a stop in the middle of the yard. And I remember that the first thing that I thought was, I cannot believe that I lived. And then the second thing that crossed my mind was, I bet I can drive anything now. And I realize now, years later, that what my dad was doing by challenging us kids all the time was he was giving us impossible things to do, extremely difficult things to do, and throwing us into the middle of it. But what he was doing for us was creating us to be problem solvers. And that when we did do something that was extremely challenging or unique or different, that we actually lived through, did successfully, and became good at, it gave us the confidence to take on even more challenging things. That's the attitude that I hope that all of us have in this day and age. Yes, we live in a much more dangerous world. Yes, we have more bad actors out there that are constantly trying to infiltrate our systems, constantly trying to come after us and utilize our software and technologies against the United States of America. But that gives us an opportunity to do big things, to be visionaries, to create unique partnerships that we never have before. I know the press has covered the role of Homeland Security and what we have done in CISA as far as some of the reforms and efficiencies and some of the initiatives and task forces and advisory councils that we're changing as a bad thing. I would encourage you to say, just wait till you see what we're able to do, that there are reforms going on that's going to be much more responsive. Instead of just talking about cybersecurity, we're going to do it. You're going to have a seat at the table that'll be much bigger and will help you partner with us in a way that really will make sure that there's consequences in place for bad actors, and that we make sure that we are able to bring more security to the American people. Technology can bring us together, and it can make things easier to do. But we also live in a world that does not tolerate inconvenience very well. Many times we have ADD and jump from one thing to another, but when we have critical infrastructure that is threatened, we need to make sure that we're going after it and dealing with it and protecting it as much as we possibly can. Every year, what happens on the internet continues to grow, and every aspect of American life touches the internet. Cyber warfare, cyber crimes are prevalent, and they happen right in front of us, and they're full-fledged operations that are working to destroy us. We can adapt to new technologies, or we can fall prey to it. And so our goal is to use our maximum effect of cooperation to make sure that we're going after those bad actors. And we've seen examples of cyber espionage like Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon that have been very effective against us. And one of the things that had alarmed me the first time that I had been briefed on those situations coming into this role before I was ever sworn in was that we don't necessarily know exactly how it happened, and we don't know how to prevent it in the future. My goal is to make sure that we are able to have more of those answers and more tools and be able to stop and prevent those kinds of invasions into our country and demonstrations of how they can shut down our critical infrastructure. Stealing our data, intellectual property theft, credential access, counterintelligence, all of those are areas that we're re-examining on what we can do and break down the silos that have always existed in government and break down the silos that with our intelligence agencies to bring everybody to the table to have solutions to make sure we're building on partnerships. And bringing you to the table with those public and private partnerships is incredibly important and going to be in our future. We're going to make sure that we need to put CISA back on mission, that many times CISA is doing important work, but we also saw them get into areas that were not why they were created. When Congress created CISA, they created them to go out there and hunt and harden our systems, to help support small and medium businesses, states and localities and cities, to make sure that they were able to defend off bad actors and to create systems that were much more secure and operate to provide consistency. Instead, we saw CISA get into a misinformation, disinformation campaign. They were deciding what was truth and what was not, and it's not the job of CISA to be the Ministry of Truth. It is the job to be a cybersecurity agency that works to protect this country. We are conducting an assessment of this office to make sure that we are not overreaching, that we're returning money back to taxpayers, and we're realigning the workforce to focus on what the mission is that Congress has laid out. And we've got many members of Congress that have a vision for how we can do that as well, and we're working with them in a new way to make sure that we have a uniform approach and a national security approach to how we address the threats that we currently face. We know that one of the biggest threats that we still continue to see and affecting us is China. The 2025 annual threat assessment by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which was just released last month, and I discussed this with many of you today, still says and confirms that China remains our biggest cyber threat in the United States. And they're going after, many times, the little guys first. They start with small businesses, local governments, and attack them. And we all know that even the biggest systems and our entire federal government is only as strong as our weakest link, our weakest system that ties into those bigger systems that make us all vulnerable. We should be helping those Americans. We should be helping those small and medium-sized businesses, infrastructure systems, and working with our utilities and water systems to help them harden their systems to protect them into the future. Our resiliency matters, and it matters that we're out there supporting that, keeping our eye on the goal. We're vital to ensuring that all of these entities and that all Americans who are vulnerable right now to cyber attacks are prepared against assaults, and that we're working with everyone to make that happen. The goal of CISA is to be operational, to be out there working on the ground and deliver on its message. And it's this administration, President Trump's administration, who wants to see the work being done to make sure that we are operationalizing all of the things that it's responsible for. This is going to continue to be our nation's cyber defense agency, and it's going to be the coordinator for critical infrastructure systems and how we provide them with security and resilience, advice ahead of things that happen, during a crisis situation, and then how to recuperate and to learn if something bad were to happen that would cause them to be vulnerable. I would say that going forward, the things that we're going to continue to focus on to defend critical infrastructure includes these. It includes focusing on our federal civilian network defense. We're going to support these small and medium-sized businesses, support critical infrastructure, deliver services to states and local governments. And one of the areas that I want to provide guidance on is how we work with those states and how we coordinate with them. What kind of a blueprint can we give them for how they partner with perhaps a National Guard response in an emergency situation? How do they coordinate with those local folks to deliver and to harden their systems should something happen? And sharing threat information and mitigation guidance in a much more direct way. One of the communications I just sent to all of the governors in this country was that they all need a SCIF. Many of them don't even have a secure facility to have a discussion in. They don't have secure comms with them that we could share national security information with them, that they should have that, and they should have a point person in their state that we communicate with should a crisis arise or we have a cyber threat that needs to be dealt with in a very uniform but quick and efficient way. We can't wait days and weeks and months to respond to an attempt or to a stealing of our data or information or systems. We have to respond immediately, and the quicker we can line up those communication channels, the better we will be at stopping it and holding these bad actors accountable. We have some changes that are coming as far as how we spend our money. There's been some coverage and some discussions on even looking at our buildings and how we build our buildings. For instance, many of you have heard that CISA is getting a new headquarters building, and we put that on hold right now, reevaluating how it's being built. In fact, the design for that building was laid out 10 years ago. Is that still going to meet our needs today for what we need for a secure facility in order to really headquarter the kind of partnerships that we need to have? We also terminated some funding for some activities to put into other areas that would help us harden our cybersecurity operations. We saved the taxpayers $10 million, and we're going to allow CISA to continue to focus on the defense of our country. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act needs to be reauthorized. That was passed in 2015. And I'm going to ask for your help immediately if you would contact us and give us some recommendations for what we could put forward into memos or into executive orders immediately that would help you streamline our approach to how we do cybersecurity in this country, but that could be codified into law through that Reauthorization Act. And then there's also the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act that passed in 2022. We're reviewing all of that private sector feedback that you've given us to make sure that it is incorporated into updates and policies that would be put into statute that we need to have discussions on to, is it serving us well? We have experience and years of background now that we can go on to improve our systems and our communications. This framework has been discussed for years, but it's time to take action and to put it into place. There's one thing I want to talk to you about before I leave you today, and it is the Secure by Design discussions that we've been having. It doesn't incorporate just social media posts, and Secure by Design isn't a proposal that we want to see in just an awareness campaign. To all of you out there who are working on making sure that you're building good systems, I want you to know that the approach from the government is going to be very different now in the future. To all of you who are technology companies, cloud providers, internet service providers, cybersecurity companies, the time is now to make sure that we're implementing and having Secure by Design. We'll do our part, but we're also at the Department of Homeland Security going to be using our purchasing power to demand that we have secure products on the market. We're going to be making recommendations to state and local agencies and government entities to make sure that they're focusing on having Secure by Design products in place. In accordance to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR, as you all know and refer to it as, we'll be enforcing provisions that demand security at the outset. We're not going to be paying for security add-ons that should have already been in the software to begin with, that should have been in the product that we're buying. And we're no longer going to be paying for extra dollars and taxpayer dollars to rectify security lapses that never should have occurred in the first place. I want to work with you to make sure that we're not becoming a burdensome regulation on our private sector, but that we're working with you to make sure that we have products out there that truly do protect this nation's future. We're going to make sure that we get it right, and I would point to just my background and my experience in coming to the table and working with folks to come up with solutions that everyone can come out in a situation where you can be successful. Our states and our communities are the backbone of this country. We're a union of states that our founders gave us a constitution that created and gave them the power. The federal government is here to support them and to provide for the nation's defense. And Washington, D.C. does not have all of the answers. We're not here to solve every single person's problems, but we do have a responsibility. And the federal government was created to protect freedom for the states. It wasn't created to take them over. This should be reassuring to all of you because of the flexibility it'll allow you to have in how you interact with us, the candid conversations that we're going to have. When I identified cybersecurity as the next big industry for South Dakota, I had the privilege of working with the president of Dakota State University, Dr. Griffiths, who is phenomenal and had a vision for doubling the size of the school, creating a whole new campus in our largest city, recruiting people from around the world to come in and train the next generation. And now adding programs before I left in quantum computing and being aggressive in what we're doing as far as interacting with AI and training those individuals. We can not only just secure our nation, be educators in what we can do, build partnerships to create new opportunities. So I would ask all of you to not just think about what we haven't done well in the past, but give us a vision for ways that you think that we can be much more efficient and accountable to the people in this country. When CISA was created 6 years ago, it was built to make sure that we were a cybersecurity agency. We didn't have on-the-ground knowledge at that time at what our country needed. We didn't have a lot of resources at that time 6 years ago. But now CISA works in far-flung communities internationally and works with infrastructure systems around the country. We didn't have optimized way to share information back then or people who could implement a lot of methods, but a lot of that has changed. And a lot of this has been put into place now where we have data and information we can use to do some things that really would protect our country better. Alexander Hamilton wrote in the Federalist 70 that a government poorly executed is just bad government. And the reality is that the work of good government is long overdue. We are reviewing funding, we're making adjustments, we're looking at the threats of today and the capabilities that we have, but also what you can provide, and we're preparing for our future. We're focused on not having overlapping technologies. We're going to harness artificial intelligence, standardize the use of advanced encryption to further secure our systems, and we're investing significant resources, which you will see soon in the coming days when the President has his proposal and his budget going forward in our interactions with Congress, that will ensure that America remains the global leader in technology, information, and innovation. We're going to protect those investments and realize that there's long-term benefits to our great nation. DHS is committed to cybersecurity. I'm committed to cybersecurity, as is the President, recognizing it's a national security imperative responsibility that rests on our shoulders. And a national defense comes through a CISA that continues to do its job well, but becomes even more improved and on mission every single day. So thank you for being here, and thank you for helping us make that a reality today. And we're anxious and looking forward to partnering with you. Thank you for letting me be with you today, and may God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for those remarks.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming out to this year's conference to speak. We really appreciate it. If it's okay with you, we'd like to have Dr. Griffiths come out and do a fireside chat. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jose Marie Griffiths, President of Dakota State University.
Well, good afternoon, Secretary.
Good afternoon. Yes,
welcome to my world.
Thank you for facilitating a reunion for all of us.
Yeah, that's great. Do you mind if I take a moment?
Yes,
Trying to upstage you or anything, but I really have to thank RSA for their Scholars Program. They have this amazing Scholars Program for university students who can come here. And this is a great opportunity for them, not only to come to this conference sort of one time, but they have lifelong benefits where they interact with the people they meet. So thank you, RSA, for that Scholars Program.
Fantastic.
So.
That's fantastic. Yes.
So, Secretary Noem, we've talked about cybersecurity many, many times over the last 8 years or so. You've emphasized that cybersecurity is really a key component in defending the homeland. Can you elaborate a little bit on your plans for addressing what are, in fact, growing threats to the homeland through attacks on critical infrastructure in particular?
Yeah, the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for 10 of the 16 critical infrastructure components. So we have a lot of responsibility just under our umbrella on what we need to do to provide those resources to really hunt down those bad actors and then to help harden our systems. So we're thinking out of the box on ways that we can partner with private industry, recognizing that the government doesn't do a good job in staying in front of and on top of all of the emerging threats that we constantly face. And it's not just ransomware or malware that's being utilized. Now they're showing and proving that they can hack into our critical infrastructure and control them and shut them down in ways that would cripple this country. Not just cripple this country in how we do commerce or how we talk to each other, but how we even provide sustenance, energy, get food to people. I tell people quite consistently, if you think a pandemic was scary, wait until you go to a grocery store and there's no food on the shelves, and what happens, to the American people and the threats that they face. We've seen in the past where we've had PRC actors go into and break into Assault Typhoon, our telecom systems, and steal personal identity information. But the only reason to break into critical infrastructure, water and utilities, is to prove they can control it. And that is the real threat that we have, is that we have, not a great extensive knowledge right now on how we prevent that from happening into the future. So what I have done specifically at the direction of President Trump is to break down the silos that happen in government so much. Many times CISA was operating in its own little world and wasn't communicating on what we were doing or how we were investing, and we weren't talking to TSA. we weren't using the systems that CBP has. CBP has an incredible amount of information that could be helpful to what we need to do to secure our systems. FEMA has a lot more information as well in how we do that. And then once you get outside the umbrella of DHS, were we working closely with the three-letter agencies, with the FBI, the CIA, with even Interpol? We've had some fantastic conversations and new partnerships we're building on how we work internationally. And then really what I've found is that, and it was confirmed today, that when we do have bad actors, there has to be consequences. There has to be consequences, and the government can do that in a way that maybe private industry can't. We can hold them accountable to make an example of them in a way that would help dissuade that kind of action farther into the future. So those kinds of ideas and information are things that we need from you as well, other areas that we can build on those security functions that the DHS and CISA in particular needs to do.
Madam Secretary, as you were going through a confirmation process, there were a lot of people in Washington and elsewhere, I guess, calling for CISA to be eliminated.
Yes.
You never said that. You always said, no, there's something here. And so I'm assuming that, you're talking about improving communications across silos and so on. Are there other improvements you are wanting to make with CISA so to make it more effective?
Well, and I think you have to communicate really what CISA does. A lot of people were only hearing about CISA when it was in the news for something bad, right?
Yep.
When it was something during an election, during COVID, when they were deciding what was truth and what wasn't true. Some of the materials I've seen that the agency generated were clearly very inappropriate, not what the mission set was for CISA to be doing. They shouldn't have been involved in that at all. Again, like I said in my speech, it's not tasked with being the Ministry of Truth. It's tasked with being a cybersecurity agency. And so getting it back on mission and making sure that we don't just say that and talk about it differently, but that we're out there talking about what we do and then taking action on it. Rededicating employees towards actually working with private industry to get ahead of those that would wish to undermine us. So repurposing into that. I think that's where a lot of folks have thought, well, this cybersecurity, is it a priority for the Trump administration? It absolutely is. It just didn't like how it got off mission for why it was created. And it needs to get back to doing what this country really needs and the threats that we face in order to not just stay viable and not just to conduct everyday life, but to continue to lead the world.
Yeah. You've heard, I'm sure, many times about the need to, reducing regulation is a priority for the administration, but at the same time, we want some level of we talk about guardrails a lot these days, especially in the AI world. How do you put in appropriate guardrails but still not stifle innovation? I think, the world that we're evolving into with the relationship between cybersecurity, the evolution of AI and its role in cybersecurity and vice versa, is changing everything we do, and it's changing the threat surface and the bad actors, if you like, in terms of the capabilities they're developing as well. So how do we allow innovation to flourish, but at the same time create some kind of guardrails going forward?
Yeah, so the guardrails come forward through working with Congress on feedback from those like you who have spent your life in this world and understand how AI and how technology, how quantum computing and how cybersecurity efforts can be utilized and how it could be utilized against us too. The government is not here to be the answer to everybody's problems. We can put some boundaries there, but it really needs to maintain the flexibility in order for us to be responsive and to stay in front of those who would use it against us as weapons. And that's really what's happening, is that these technologies are being weaponized against us. And so I also believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you've got to give private industry some umbrella of protection that they feel free to share with the government. They have to be able to, because they know where the threats are, they know what they're doing. When they see a new pattern develop, a new software program, or something that specifically was designed to infiltrate and to damage our nation's security, they have to feel as though they have the ability to communicate that with us, and that we can go out and take action on it. I have found that in my job now today, many times I'm the one who gets the responsibility on my shoulders to be the one who's the enforcer or the one who is putting things into place and communicating it, but then also being accountable for it. The country needs to have a government that's willing to do that, but we can't possibly have the resources, nor should we have the resources, to provide all the answers and the information. That's where I really think a lot of the folks that are in this room and outside of this room that are in the cybersecurity space need to have some kind of a protection, ability to communicate with us without fear of them, their livelihoods, and all of their employees and their businesses being destroyed because of that.
So in the media, we hear a lot of things. We hear a lot about what's being taken away, what's being eliminated, what's being cancelled, etc.
Right.
We don't hear very much about plans for the future.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you would build back again, perhaps in a different way?
Yes.
So that, and how is it different from what's gone in the past?
Well, there's been some discussions on eliminating and some actions taken to eliminate, like CPAC, which was the Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council, and some of that, but that is because it's being reformed and put in place with something that will bring more people to the table and be much more action-oriented. Okay. And that's really what we need to have happen, is to have a diversity of people sitting there giving us action plans on what we can do. You know, how it has been portrayed is not accurate, that things have been eliminated or that it's not a priority. And I would say it's a strong testimony to where this administration's position is, and the fact that you have the Secretary of Homeland Security here at your conference. You have my Deputy Secretary, Troy Edgar, here was here as well. And you also have our nominated CISA Director, which will go forward, and Sean Curran as well, all attending here, and many of the folks that work with CISA every day. So I don't think you've ever seen this much of a contingent attend this conference talking about the importance of cybersecurity, unless it was a priority for this country and a priority for President Trump. So we will continue to do that. We're just doing it in a way that we think will be much more responsive and much more proactive. We've been on the defense so much. After something happens, we evaluate and try to see how we can harden our systems or patch products so that it doesn't happen again. We need to be on the offense, but we need to be on the offense in a way that the country is leading it and allows us to make sure that we're doing it in a wise manner that uses some discernment into how it really gets us into a position to strengthen our posture going forward, and working at it from a viewpoint of national security, not just the technology systems and where they're vulnerable.
Right. You talked a little bit about the relationship between the federal government and industry. You've been a two-term governor. Do you see a role for the states in
I do.
protecting?
I feel like most of the innovation can happen at the state level. You know, I tell people that when I first got elected as governor, the very first briefing I had during the transition, I went to our state capitol. The former governor and his staff sat in a room with me and my transition folks. And I sat down, and the former governor said to me, listen, the very first thing that you need to do is that you need to harden our systems and deal with the cybersecurity issues that we have here in our state. He said, we've got all of our state software programs still on an old server that's been out of date for about 50 years. And he said, and it's going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars, and we haven't had the money to spend on it, but it needs to be done because we're extremely vulnerable. Now, if you look at all the information that a state holds between all of the social programs, the Medicaid programs, the child care programs, if you look at health information through the public of health, you look at the public safety department, law enforcement, criminal cases, there is millions of endpoints of information that a state holds, and many times states don't have the money to invest in protecting those systems. That's really where CISA can play a big role in helping to support that. And one of the things I referenced in my speech as well is that we can spend a lot of money at the federal government level securing our systems, but if we're interacting and interfacing with those states and cities and letting them feed information into us, you know, we're opening up vulnerabilities to the entire system. So it's in our nation's best interest to work with those states and make that a priority.
So there's sort of layers. From
yes, and I also think that the partnership that we've had, you know, people talk a lot about the state that I'm from as being small and not very many people. And I've always looked at that as an opportunity for us to be nimble. When you're small, you can do things that other states can't do. You can be innovative, and we did some big things while we were there and grew the state substantially. We recruited hundreds of businesses, thousands of people to the state the state's in a totally different financial position than it was before, and we invested in our students. And we created an opportunity for those that wanted to be in the technology space and to be in the cybersecurity space to get an education right there at home, and from around the world they come to South Dakota for our top-notch education that we provide, and they can have careers right there as well. So that's the vision. I think empowering leaders like you is really what we need to be doing, who know what needs to be done, how to help it get impacted and put on the ground, and help facilitating. And many times, government just needs to get out of your way. Yeah. Provide the guardrails, but also get out of your way and allow you to do that so that we have a better future.
Oh yeah, we did do some good things, particularly in the education of future students, and growing the industry, the cybersecurity industry in the state. I wanted to ask you about on the research side, because academic institutions very much, of course, involved in the nation's research, and you recently have closed your science and technology division, as has NASA, as is Energy and other entities. You are one of the agencies so far that has put out, this is our future research agenda, this is how we're going to organize our science and technology. Could you talk a little bit about that and the potential relationship with the academic world?
Yeah, that's really where the partnerships can begin. When we don't think we hold all the knowledge and information within the federal government, by streamlining, we build in efficiencies that allow us to partner with you and have the resources to allow you to be the innovation and the think tank, the developer, and the delivery of that kind of science and technology and the research that needs to be done. I have many times, and I would say almost all the time, not found the answers to our country's biggest problems and developments and innovation within a government system. It was always when we were interacting with academia or people who were on the front lines. And when it comes to cyber warfare, espionage campaigns, when it comes to what I need to deal with today in our national security portfolio, many times the new products that are being developed or the research that's being done is being done with private industry, but also private industry partnering that's already been partnering with you. You've built those relationships and had them there. And that research can then, many times, we have to prove out that it is something worthy of investing in. I tell people consistently, the taxpayer doesn't have a lobbyist most of the times in the room. There's lots of lobbyists that show up for funding. There's lots of people that show up for industries and specific projects and priorities, but many times the average American citizen isn't in the room, and I view that as my responsibility. So if you've proven out through research that something is a viable product that the government could build on and help facilitate, that actually secures our systems or helps us win the technology race, boy, that's incredibly valuable, and that's where we should be putting our resources.
Yeah, we do see that as a big role for academia. What about international partnerships? Obviously, cybersecurity is an international issue. Can you talk about some of the international partnerships?
Yes, we've been working a lot with building on conversations that need to happen with other countries, especially in regards to companies that are globally located and operate internationally. And many times the networks that connect them in countries that aren't necessarily so friendly, for instance, businesses that may have an executive team or even headquarters in China, but have businesses and locations here in the United States. How do we protect their systems and their government from having access to our information and our commerce and our systems that we interact with as well? So being proactive in building out those types of relationships with not just countries that maybe don't want to share information with us, but those that do, that also do business in that space, and building those relationships on what tools do they use, what authorities do they use, what do we need to build into potentially our reauthorization statutes that will give us more opportunities to protect the information and the data that we have in our critical infrastructure. And then you heard me reference Interpol as well. A lot of what we've found is that many people have information out there in other countries on criminal background information, cases that they've been dealing with some of these cyber crimes as well that we haven't had the information on. And if we can build a partnership to share that type of information, it helps us hold people more accountable as well.
Well, Madam Secretary, I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever told you this story, but when I went to Dakota State University, several people around campus, not the people in computer science or cybersecurity, asked me if I thought cybersecurity was a fad. And my answer was no. I think it's going to be here to stay. And I have to thank you because you've been a champion for cybersecurity ever since I got there. And the first conversations we had, even when you were still in Congress, were very, very important. So I think you are in an important place right now. Your knowledge of cybersecurity, your knowledge of other areas too, but particularly in cybersecurity can be particularly helpful. And so you have the people in this room and out there in the rest of the conference center who can be helpful in this regard. So we thank you for everything that you've done.
Well, thank you. And I would encourage all of you to reach out to us. And Hugh and the RSA team, they all know our contact information. We're going to be asking for your help on short, immediate things that we can be doing that will help us secure our country, but then also longer-term goals and how we develop out products and systems to make sure that we really truly are providing for the American people a secure country that also does business internationally in a way that protects their identity, protects their information, but also protects our critical infrastructure to make sure that we can continue to live and thrive and survive here in the United States.
And this is just a portion of your overall portfolio, isn't it? Your job is massive.
That is the one thing. Unfortunately, I don't get to just focus on CISA and cybersecurity. We have 23 different components under the Department of Homeland Security, and many of them are needing some attention. Besides immigration, border, there's TSA, FEMA's, Secret Service. We have the Coast Guard. We have INA, USCIS. Weapons of mass destruction. So we have a lot of responsibilities and a lot to do, but that's why I'm more than ever convinced that we need everybody to help us be a part of the solution.
Sounds good. And cybersecurity is sort of one of those things that cuts across everything.
It cuts across all of them, absolutely. No matter what area we're in and what part of the government in, or who you're talking to, communicating with, or doing business with, we absolutely have to have secure systems and be trustworthy. We have to be trustworthy, or the American people will not allow us the privilege to continue to work for them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to be with you today. Appreciate it.